Hello and welcome to another episode of The Living Philosophy. Today I want to talk about the collective unconscious of Carl Jung again, and I want to talk about how he goes about proving it. So I'll give a little overview of what the collective unconscious is, but if you really want to get a deeper understanding of it, I'd advise to check out the video on it. I'll post a link just up there. So what is the collective unconscious? How do you prove it? So basically what the collective unconscious is it's the inherited part of the mind. So it's the depths of the mind that we inherit, and they're archetypal patterns that would have played out through the human life throughout history, and so become useful for us to inherit. So you can think of it as the reservoir of inherited instincts. So Jung had one dream about this, which gives a good understanding, in which he's on the top level, and that is the present, like it's a present level of architecture, and he goes a layer deeper and it's medieval, and a layer deeper and it's Roman, and a layer deeper and he goes through a trapdoor and there's two bodies down there and it's Adam and Eve, and it's the history of the psyche contained in one mind. So the ancestors, the ancients, they're all with us as we go through time, because we meet more or less the same scenarios. We all become adolescents, we all experience childhood, we have parents, and so there's these common patterns, having a family, having kids, facing death, and we're not the first ones to experience these. So there's an evolved kind of way of dealing with these things that can become activated, which is the collective unconscious. How could Jung prove this? It was a difficulty when he had this theory, because it seems very difficult to prove. Well, how do you know that a symbol or a myth, how do you know that that's universal rather than something that I just came up with myself and seems similar to other things? And so one example where Jung found a very good way of proving it, or one bit of evidence for it anyway, was he worked in a mental institution in Switzerland. I think it was Burghölzli, and one of the patients there, this was around 1906 was the story of this patient, and this patient gestured Jung to come over to the window, and he says, hey, start moving your head side to side like this, and if you look at the sun, you can see the phallus of the sun coming out, or I think maybe he said the tunnel, a tunnel or a tube coming out of the sun, and that's the source of the wind. And Jung thought that was quite interesting. He made a note of it and kind of forgot about it for a few years, but a few years later a book came out, I think around 1910, and it was just a new translation of a tablet that had been found in the Near East, and it was a translation of the Mithraic liturgy, or a part of the Mithraic liturgy. Now, Mithras was it was a very important cult in ancient Rome, along with the Isis cult and the Christian cult. If you want to have a look at that, I've got a video where I talk about those three different cults and how similar they are to what's going on with modern importing of Eastern religions. But the Mithras cult was similar to Christianity in a sense, the death and rebirth, but of Mithras rather than Christ. And anyway, Jung talks about he read this book that was newly translated version of a tablet from the liturgy, and it described just that. It described in the myth, or in the ritual, there was a sun, and out of the sun came this tube, this cylinder, this phallus, and out of the phallus came the wind. That was the place where the wind was born from. And so Jung found that to be almost unmistakable, because the man had been in the institution for a decade before. Like, since he was a young man, he was just the son of a farmer. He wouldn't have gone to university or anything. He would have had no chance to encounter anything like that, and the book hadn't even been translated anyway, it hadn't even been discovered. And so yeah, it's a very interesting thing of like how could he possibly have had such a similar vision, hallucination, like emerging from the unconscious. And Jung supposed that it was proof of a deeper layer of the unconscious, and this is the collective unconscious, and that there are symbols down there that are timeless, and that can emerge out of any human, really, because we all have that connection to the collective unconscious. And this is why you find people who worship the sun in very similar ways. Jung talks about going to Africa and the people spitting on their hands and praying into the sun, and he talks about going to the very west coast of America, and they were sun believers, and they believed that they were the sons of the sun, and the sun wouldn't rise if it wasn't for them. And so there's these archetypal kind of connections. There's patterns that just seem to emerge in different places, and it doesn't seem to be connected to a personal mythology, personal unconscious mythologizing, or even to just someone. Even if you're just coming up with an idea, it would be very interesting to come up with the same idea. You could think of something like Newton and Leibniz coming up with calculus at the same time. But that wouldn't necessarily be the collective unconscious, but it's that thing of like the independent arising of something at the same time. Another example would be the emergence of the golden rule. The golden rule being the classical religious ethical formulation of do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And Karen Armstrong, in a very interesting book called The Great Transformation, she talks about how the golden rule emerges in the Jewish tradition with Jeremiah and Samuel, in the Chinese tradition, Lao Tzu, Confucius, in the Indian traditions, Upanishad and Buddhism, and in the Western Greek philosophical tradition, how you see the emergence of this idea happen in these disconnected cultures, seemingly at the same time, but without a connection. And yeah, that could be an example of the collective unconscious, and there could be a lot more going on there. Of course, you could say, why is that just in the old world? Why do we not see that? But maybe it's because we don't have records. But anyway, it's an interesting to see that common emergence, and that would be a hypothetical proof of the collective unconscious. You have to look at something, at the emergence of something, at the two emergences of something that are so similar that it can't be coincidence, and they can't be connected. And that's a very difficult thing to find examples of. But it's always well, Jung found an example. Probably be even more difficult now with the internet to do it, because you never know what someone has been connected to, what bit of information could have gotten to them. So it'd be very difficult to establish that kind of proof now. And this is why it's so hard to prove the collective unconscious, and why it could just be dismissed, because you just don't know, really. And but in this case, Jung says, with only a tiny reasonable bit of doubt, it would be unreasonable to doubt it. So interesting. I thought I'd share that with you, and I hope you've gotten something out of it. And thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe, and otherwise I'll see you next time. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments if you've got anything to add, any insights, thoughts, any other examples or proofs of the collective unconscious. And otherwise, thanks for watching. See you next time.